The year is 2342. Neon signs flickered erratically, casting a sickly glow on the rain-slicked streets of Neo-Kyoto. Towering skyscrapers, once symbols of human ingenuity, now served as decaying monuments to a bygone era of prosperity. Resources were stretched thin, rationed meticulously by a governing body that seemed increasingly distant and indifferent to the plight of those dwelling in the lower sectors. The air itself tasted metallic, a constant reminder of the environmental decay that plagued the planet. Food was a luxury, protein synthesized from algae and recycled waste, barely palatable but necessary for survival. Mark, a wiry man in his late 20s, navigated the crowded streets with a weary familiarity. His clothes, patched and faded, bore testament to the years he had spent scavenging and struggling to make ends meet. He resided in Sector 7, a barely habitable zone where the city's infrastructure had all but collapsed. Each day was a relentless battle for survival, a constant search for scraps and opportunities amidst the urban decay. He clutched a nutrient-paced ration in his hand, his allotment for the next 2 days. He had managed to supplement it with some scavenged synth protein, a small victory in the grand scheme of things. He reached his cramped apartment, a single room with barely enough space to lie down. He carefully placed the ration packet on a makeshift shelf, his stomach rumbling in protest. He had been looking forward to this meager meal all day. But the next morning, the ration was gone. Vanished. He scoured the small room, searching every nook and cranny, but to no avail. It was simply gone. He cursed under his breath, frustration boiling over. He had been so careful, so meticulous in his rationing. How could this have happened? The next night, he secured his next ration packet even more carefully, placing it inside a locked metal container. He went to sleep hungry, hoping for a better morning. But the following day, the container was empty, the lock expertly bypassed. His desperation grew. This wasn't just about hunger, it was about survival. Every calorie counted in this harsh environment. Someone, or something, was deliberately stealing his food, pushing him closer to the brink. He couldn't afford to lose any more. Humanity, in its expansion across the stars, had encountered countless alien species. The human-friendly universe, or HFY, was founded on the principle of peaceful coexistence and mutual aid. Most species adhered to this ideal, fostering trade and cultural exchange. But some species, less fortunate or less adaptable, struggled to find their place within this interstellar society. They often ended up on the fringes of human territories, competing for dwindling resources and facing prejudice. It was a grim reality often overlooked in the grand narratives of galactic harmony. Mark initially suspected a scavenger, perhaps a desperate human, or a rodent-like alien species known to infest the lower sectors. But something felt different about this. The precision with which the food was taken, the way the locks were bypassed, suggested a level of intelligence and dexterity beyond that of a common scavenger. He felt a prickle of unease, a sense that he was dealing with something more than just petty theft. He had to find out who, or what, was stealing his food. He needed to take action, and soon, before he starved. If you want to discover what Mark finds, subscribe to our channel and follow his journey into the depths of Neo-Kyoto. 667. Mark decided to set a trap. He couldn't afford to lose another ration. He spent the day scavenging for discarded tech, his mind racing. He needed something that could alert him to the thief's presence without putting him in immediate danger. He found a pressure sensor salvaged from a broken security drone, its wires frayed and sparking intermittently. It would do. He also managed to acquire a small, portable energy cell, enough to power the sensor for a few nights. Back in his apartment, he meticulously set up his makeshift security system. He positioned the pressure sensor beneath a loose floor tile near his ration container. He connected it to the energy cell and a salvaged audio amplifier. The amplifier, though old and crackling, would emit a high-pitched whine when the sensor was triggered, loud enough to wake him but hopefully not alert the thief. It was crude, but it was all he had. He spent hours calibrating the sensor, adjusting the sensitivity to avoid false alarms from the vibrations of the dilapidated building. Finally, as darkness fell, he placed a fresh ration packet in the container, armed his trap, and waited, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The night was long and silent. The city outside hummed with a dissonant symphony of grinding gears, flickering neon lights, and distant sirens. Mark lay awake, his senses on high alert, listening for any sign of intrusion. Just as he was about to succumb to exhaustion, a sharp, piercing whine cut through the silence. He jolted upright, his hand instinctively reaching for a rusted pipe he kept by his bedside for protection. He crept towards the ration container, his bare feet padding softly on the cold, metal floor. He peered into the dim light, his eyes widening in disbelief. It wasn't a scavenger, not like any he had seen before. A small, frail figure crouched beside the container, its back to him. It was an alien, unlike any species he recognized. It was small, no larger than a human child, with thin, spindly limbs and large, luminous eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent blue, and its head was adorned with delicate, feathery antennae that twitched nervously. The creature worked with surprising speed and dexterity, its nimble fingers deftly bypassing the container's locking mechanism. Mark felt a surge of anger, fueled by hunger and desperation. But as he looked closer, he saw the creature's vulnerability. It was emaciated, its ribs visible beneath its thin skin. Its movements were jerky and uncoordinated, as if it were struggling to maintain its balance. There was a palpable sense of desperation radiating from it, a desperate hunger that mirrored his own. He watched as the alien girl finally managed to open the container and snatch the ration packet. She clutched it tightly to her chest, her large eyes darting nervously around the room. Mark considered confronting her, demanding his food back. But something stopped him. He saw the raw desperation in her eyes, the sheer will to survive. He couldn't bring himself to take the food from her. Instead, he decided to follow her. He wanted to know where she was going, why she was stealing his food. He waited until she scurried out of his apartment and into the darkened hallway before cautiously emerging. He kept a safe distance, careful not to make a sound. The alien girl moved with surprising agility, navigating the labyrinthine corridors and crumbling stairwells of the dilapidated building with ease. She was faster than he anticipated, slipping through narrow cracks and scaling precarious ledges with a grace that belied her frail appearance. He had to be careful, or he would lose her. He needed to know where she was going. 667. Mark cautiously trailed the alien girl, his footsteps muffled by the debris-strewn floors. She moved with a surprising speed, weaving through the decaying labyrinth of Sector 7 like a phantom. The corridors were narrow and dimly lit, illuminated only by the occasional flickering emergency light, or the eerie glow of the city's distant neon signs filtering through broken windows. The air was thick with the smell of decay, a pungent mixture of mold, rust, and unidentifiable organic matter. He had to be careful. One wrong step, one misplaced sound, and he would lose her. He relied on his years of scavenging experience, moving silently and efficiently through the urban wasteland. He knew these streets like the back of his hand, the hidden pathways, the unstable floors, the blind corners where danger lurked. The areas the girl frequented were even more dilapidated than his own. Entire sections of the building had collapsed, leaving gaping holes that exposed the interior to the elements. Twisted metal and shattered concrete formed treacherous obstacles, forcing him to pick his way carefully. He saw evidence of other desperate souls living in these forgotten corners of the city, makeshift shelters constructed from salvaged materials, discarded scraps of food, and the faint glow of dying energy cells. The disparity between these squalid conditions and the opulent human zones of Neo-Kyoto was staggering. In the upper sectors, gleaming skyscrapers pierced the clouds, powered by clean energy and patrolled by automated security drones. Citizens enjoyed synthetic delicacies, luxurious accommodations, and access to advanced medical care. Down here, survival was a daily struggle, a brutal fight for scraps in a world that had seemingly forgotten them. Suddenly, the girl stopped, her antennae twitching nervously. She seemed to sense his presence. Mark froze, pressing himself against the crumbling wall, his heart pounding in his chest. He held his breath, trying to blend into the shadows. He could see her large, luminous eyes scanning the corridor, searching for any sign of movement. He used the trick he had learned from the streets, focusing his gaze on a point beyond her, blurring his vision to minimize the chance of catching her attention. It was a technique scavengers used to avoid detection by security drones, and it seemed to work. After a tense moment, the girl relaxed, her antennae ceasing their frantic twitching. She continued on her way, disappearing around a dark corner. Mark exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. That was a close call. He had to be even more careful. He quickened his pace, determined not to lose her again. As he rounded the corner, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The girl was limping. Her left leg seemed injured, her movements slightly hampered. He felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was already frail and malnourished, and now she was injured as well. Stealing food wasn't just about greed, it was about survival. He realized that she wasn't just taking his food for herself, she was likely taking it for someone else. Someone even more vulnerable than she was. He followed her for another few minutes, deeper and deeper into the ruins of Sector 7. The air grew colder, the darkness more oppressive. Finally, she reached her destination, a collapsed building that looked like it could crumble at any moment. It was little more than a skeletal frame of twisted metal and shattered concrete, its interior exposed to the elements. The building was condemned, marked with warning signs that had long since faded. The girl hesitated for a moment, glancing back as if she sensed his presence again. Then, with a final, determined look, she slipped through a narrow opening in the rubble and disappeared inside. Mark stopped at the entrance, his mind racing. He had found her home. But what awaited him inside? 667. Mark stood before the collapsed building, a knot forming in his stomach. He hesitated, his initial anger replaced by a profound sense of unease. This wasn't just some random scavenger. This was a desperate creature fighting for survival in the harshest of conditions. To intrude upon her home felt like a violation, an act of unwarranted aggression against someone already struggling to stay alive. The building itself seemed to exhale a sigh of defeat, its crumbling facade a testament to the relentless decay that had consumed this part of the city. He thought about his own struggles, the countless nights he had gone to sleep hungry, the constant fear of losing everything he had managed to scrape together. He remembered his own family, their faces etched with worry as they rationed their dwindling supplies, their hopes slowly fading as the city crumbled around them. Hadn't he once been in a similar position, forced to make desperate choices just to survive? Who was he to judge this alien girl, to condemn her for doing what she had to do to stay alive? The desire for revenge, the initial impulse to reclaim his stolen food, seemed petty and insignificant now. He realized that he had been so focused on his own survival that he had forgotten the importance of empathy, of understanding the struggles of others. This future, this HFY future, was supposed to be about cooperation and mutual aid, not about hoarding resources and turning a blind eye to the suffering of those less fortunate. As he stood there, battling his conscience, a faint sound drifted from within the collapsed building. It was a weak, distressed sound, a whimper of pain or perhaps a desperate plea for help. It was barely audible above the city's constant drone, but Mark heard it, and it resonated deep within him. It was the sound of suffering, the sound of someone in desperate need. The sound broke through his hesitation, shattering his doubts. He could no longer stand idly by, paralyzed by his own internal conflict. He had to investigate, to see if he could offer assistance. He might not have much to give, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that someone was in dire need. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he might find inside. He was no hero, but he couldn't turn his back on someone in need, especially not after hearing that desperate sound. He decided to proceed with caution. He reached into his worn jacket and pulled out a scavenged energy pistol, a relic from a bygone era. It was old and unreliable, its power cell barely holding a charge, but it was better than nothing. He hoped he wouldn't have to use it, But he couldn't afford to be naive. The lower sectors were dangerous, and he had no idea what awaited him inside the collapsed building. He set the pistol to stun, hoping to incapacitate any potential threats without causing permanent harm. He would only use it as a last resort, to defend himself or someone else in immediate danger. He checked the pistol's power level one last time, ensuring that it was ready if needed. He took another deep breath and stepped towards the opening in the rubble, his heart pounding in his chest. He was about to enter a world of unknown dangers, a world of desperation and suffering. But he couldn't turn back now. He had heard a cry for help, and he was determined to answer it, whatever the cost. The fate of the alien girl, and perhaps someone else as well, might depend on it. He gripped the energy pistol tightly, his hand trembling slightly, and stepped into the darkness. He hoped he was doing the right thing. He hoped he could make a difference. 667. Mark carefully squeezed through the narrow opening in the rubble, his senses on high alert. The interior of the collapsed building was even more treacherous than he had imagined. Twisted metal beams jutted out at odd angles, creating a maze of precarious obstacles. Shattered concrete and loose debris littered the floor, making each step a potential hazard. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, making it difficult to breathe. The oppressive darkness was broken only by slivers of light filtering through cracks in the walls and ceiling, casting eerie shadows that danced and shifted with every movement. He moved slowly and deliberately, testing each step before committing his weight. The structure groaned and creaked around him, a constant reminder of its instability. He could feel the vibrations of the city's machinery through the floor, a low, constant hum that resonated in his bones. The silence inside the building was unsettling, broken only by the occasional drip of water or the rustling of unseen creatures. He felt a sense of isolation, a feeling of being cut off from the world outside. As he ventured deeper into the building, he began to hear a faint sound, a soft, rhythmic wheezing that seemed to be coming from somewhere ahead. He followed the sound, his energy pistol held at the ready. He rounded a corner and found himself in a small, relatively intact chamber. The air here was even thicker and more stagnant, heavy with the smell of sickness. In the center of the chamber, huddled beneath a tattered piece of fabric, he saw them. The alien girl he had been following was kneeling beside an older alien, her small frame trembling with exhaustion. The older alien was lying on the floor, her body frail and emaciated. Her skin was a sickly shade of green, and her breathing was labored and shallow. Her large, luminous eyes were clouded with pain and exhaustion. Mark recognized the wheezing sound now. It was the sound of her struggling to breathe. He realized that this was the reason the girl had been stealing his food. She wasn't just trying to survive, she was trying to keep her mother alive. The mother's condition was dire. Her body was ravaged by some unknown illness, her life force slowly ebbing away. She looked ancient, her features worn and weary, as if she had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. The alien girl looked up as Mark entered the chamber, her eyes widening in fear. She scrambled to her feet, shielding her mother with her small body. She let out a hiss, a low, guttural sound that was both defensive and protective. She clutched a piece of scavenged metal in her hand, ready to defend her mother at any cost. Mark could see the terror in her eyes, the desperation to protect the only family she had left. He realized that he must seem like a monster to her, a towering human wielding a weapon in her already devastated world. He lowered his energy pistol, making sure she could see that he wasn't going to use it. He raised his hands slowly, signaling his peaceful intentions. He tried to speak, but he didn't know the alien girl's language. He tried using basic gestures, pointing to himself and then to the mother, indicating that he wanted to help. The girl remained wary, her eyes fixed on him, her grip on the metal shard still tight. He could see that she didn't trust him, and he couldn't blame her. He was an intruder in her home, a potential threat to her and her dying mother. He slowly knelt down, making himself smaller and less threatening. He removed his jacket and laid it on the floor, offering it as a gesture of goodwill. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out the last remaining ration packet he had. He placed it on the floor, a small offering of food for the starving mother. He looked at the alien girl, his eyes filled with compassion. He hoped she understood that he wasn't there to hurt them. He was there to help. He wanted to build a connection. 667. Mark knelt, the cold dust of the ruined building seeping into his worn trousers. He kept his movements slow, deliberate, broadcasting his peaceful intentions as clearly as he could. The alien girl, her name unknown to him, remained tense, a fragile shield protecting her even more fragile mother. He observed the mother, taking in the shallow breaths, the sunken eyes, the almost translucent skin stretched taut over bone. He wasn't a doctor, but he recognized the signs of advanced illness. She was dying, and likely soon. He guessed the ailment was specific to her species, exacerbated by the toxic environment of Sector 7. The air filtration systems were long defunct, leaving the inhabitants exposed to pollutants and pathogens. He'd seen it before, other alien species succumbing to ailments that humans were largely immune to, their bodies unable to adapt to Earth's unique blend of toxins and radiation. It was a cruel irony of the HFY universe. Goodwill and peaceful coexistence couldn't always overcome biological realities. The girl, sensing his scrutiny, let out another low hiss, a warning. He met her gaze, trying to convey empathy. He pointed to the ration packet he had placed on the floor, then gestured towards the mother. He hoped she understood that he wasn't offering charity, but sustenance, a means to keep her mother alive, at least for a little longer. After a long, agonizing moment, the girl seemed to understand. Her tense posture relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained wary. She slowly approached the ration packet, her gaze never leaving Mark. She picked it up, her thin fingers trembling, and tore it open with surprising strength. She then carefully fed the nutrient paste to her mother, who swallowed it with a weak, grateful sigh. Mark watched, feeling a pang of guilt. This small packet of food, which he had so fiercely defended, was now a lifeline for these two desperate beings. His initial anger, his desire for revenge, seemed absurd now, a testament to his own selfishness and short-sightedness. He had been so consumed by his own struggles that he had failed to see the suffering of others. He had almost allowed his own hunger to blind him to their far greater need. The girl finished feeding her mother and looked at Mark, her large eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. She spoke in a series of clicks and whistles, a language he didn't understand. But he could sense the meaning behind her words, a hesitant thank you, a plea for understanding. He shook his head, indicating that he didn't understand her language. He then pointed to himself and said, "Mark." He hoped she would understand that he was offering his name, a first step towards communication. The girl seemed to grasp the concept. She pointed to herself and said, in broken common tongue, "Lyra." Then she pointed to her mother and whispered, "Mira. Lyra. Mira." He now knew their names, a small but significant connection in this desolate place. He understood that Lyra was stealing food to keep Mira alive. He felt immense guilt wash over him. He had been ready to condemn her, to punish her for her desperation. He should have tried to understand her situation first. He reached into his pockets, finding nothing but scraps of metal and a few dried-up nutrient crumbs. He wished he had more to offer, more to give to these two struggling aliens. He remembered a time, long ago, when his own family had faced similar hardships. His father had lost his job, and they had struggled to put food on the table. He remembered his mother skipping meals so that he and his siblings could eat. He remembered the kindness of strangers, the small acts of generosity that had helped them survive. He looked at Lyra and Mira, their faces etched with hardship and suffering, and he knew what he had to do. He couldn't turn his back on them. He couldn't let them starve. He decided to help them, to share his own dwindling food rations, to do whatever he could to ease their suffering. It wouldn't be easy. He was already struggling to survive himself. But he couldn't live with himself if he did nothing. He would share what little he had, hoping that it would be enough to make a difference. 667. Mark returned to his small apartment, his mind heavy with the image of Lyra and her dying mother, Mira. His initial plan for the evening, a solitary meal of meager rations, had been completely overturned. He couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility, the weight of their survival now resting, at least partially, on his shoulders. He knew his own resources were limited, but he couldn't bring himself to abandon them to their fate. The next morning, he awoke before dawn, his stomach growling with hunger. He hesitated for a moment, considering hoarding what little food he had left. But the image of Lyra's hopeful eyes, the memory of Myra's labored breathing, spurred him into action. He divided his remaining rations in half, carefully packaging one portion for Lyra and Mira. He would have to scavenge harder, find additional sources of food to compensate for his sacrifice. He made his way back to the collapsed building, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He found Lyra tending to her mother, gently wiping her brow with a damp cloth. Myra's condition seemed unchanged, her breathing still shallow and labored. Lyra looked up as Mark approached, her eyes widening in surprise. He offered her the ration packet, a silent gesture of solidarity. Lyra accepted it gratefully, her eyes filled with unshed tears. She bowed her head slightly, a sign of respect and appreciation. Mark watched as she carefully fed Mira, her movements gentle and tender. He spent the morning helping Lyra, fetching water from a nearby leaking pipe, cleaning the small chamber as best he could. It was a small act of kindness, but he hoped it made a difference. He continued this routine every day, sharing his food and offering his assistance. He learned more about Lyra and Mira, piecing together their story through gestures and broken common language. They were refugees from a distant planet, forced to flee their home due to environmental collapse. They had hoped to find sanctuary in the HFY, but they had ended up in Sector 7, forgotten and abandoned. Lyra, despite her young age, was fiercely resourceful and determined to keep her mother alive. She scavenged for medicine and supplies, risking her own life to find anything that could ease Myra's suffering. She knew that Mira was dying, but she refused to give up hope. Mark admired her resilience, her unwavering love for her mother. Slowly, tentatively, Lyra began to trust Mark. She shared stories of her home world, describing its lush forests and clear rivers, a stark contrast to the decaying urban landscape of Sector 7. She showed him pictures of her family, holographic images stored on a damaged data chip. Mark, in turn, shared stories of his own past, of his family's struggles and his dreams for the future. There were brief moments of hope, fleeting instances when Mira seemed to rally. She would open her eyes and smile weakly at Lyra, her grip tightening slightly on her daughter's hand. These moments were precious, a reminder of the bond between mother and daughter, a glimmer of light in the darkness. Mark even managed to scavenge some rudimentary medicine, a discarded antibiotic that might help fight off infection. Mira seemed to respond, her fever decreasing slightly. But these improvements were short-lived. Myra's condition remained critical, her body slowly shutting down. Mark knew that time was running out. He spent hours searching for a cure, scouring the black markets and abandoned medical facilities of Sector 7. But resources were scarce, and specialized medicine was virtually non-existent. The HFY, for all its advancements, couldn't always reach those on the fringes of society. Despite the bleak circumstances, a bond began to form between Mark and Lyra. He became a surrogate father figure, providing her with support and guidance. He taught her survival skills, showing her how to scavenge for resources, how to defend herself against danger. He told her stories of hope and resilience, reminding her that even in the darkest of times, there was always something to fight for. He felt a growing affection for her, a paternal love he hadn't expected to find in this desolate world. He was no longer just helping a stranger, he was protecting his family. 667. The fragile equilibrium shattered. Myra's condition took a sharp turn for the worse. The brief moments of lucidity vanished, replaced by a feverish delirium. Her labored breathing grew more ragged, each inhale a desperate gasp for air. Lyra, frantic with worry, bathed her mother's forehead with cold water, her small hands trembling. The medicine Mark had scavenged seemed to have lost its effect, the infection raging unchecked through Myra's weakened body. Mark, witnessing Myra's rapid decline, felt a surge of helplessness. He had done everything he could, sharing his food, providing comfort, searching for medicine. But it wasn't enough. He needed to find a cure, a specialist, something that could reverse Myra's condition. He raced out of the collapsed building, determined to find help, but the odds were stacked against him. He ventured into the dangerous back alleys of Sector 7, seeking out contacts who might know of a doctor or a medical facility willing to treat an alien refugee. He offered what little credits he had, bartering for information. But the pickings were slim. Most doctors were unwilling to risk their reputations treating someone without proper documentation, and the few who were willing demanded exorbitant fees he couldn't afford. He tried contacting the authorities, the HFY medical services, but he was met with bureaucratic indifference. The process was long and complex, requiring extensive paperwork and multiple levels of approval. By the time he managed to navigate the red tape, Mira would likely be dead. He pleaded with the automated voice on the other end of the line, explaining the urgency of the situation, but the machine remained impassive, its programmed responses unyielding. Even in a human-friendly universe, there were limitations. Resources were finite, and priorities were often dictated by political and economic considerations. Rare diseases affecting marginalized populations often fell through the cracks, overlooked in the grand schemes of galactic healthcare. It was a harsh reality, a bitter pill to swallow for someone who believed in the ideals of the HFY. He returned to the collapsed building, his hopes dashed, his spirit crushed. He found Lyra kneeling beside her mother, sobbing quietly. Myra's breathing was barely audible, her eyes closed, her body limp. Lyra looked up at Mark, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. He had no words of comfort, no miracle cure to offer. He could only kneel beside her, offering his silent support. Lyra, distraught and terrified, clung to Mark, her small body shaking with sobs. She feared losing her mother, the only family she had left in this cold and unforgiving world. She had already lost everything, her home, her planet, her way of life. Losing her mother would be the final blow, the ultimate devastation. Mark held her close, stroking her feathery antennae, trying to soothe her. He shared stories of his own losses, the hardships he had faced, the times he had felt like giving up. He told her that even in the face of despair, there was always hope, always a reason to keep fighting. He reminded her of her own strength, her resilience, her unwavering love for her mother. He told her stories of heroes who had overcome impossible odds, of communities that had risen from the ashes, of the enduring power of the human spirit. He spoke of the importance of cherishing every moment, of making the most of the time they had left. He knew that words couldn't erase her pain, but he hoped they could offer some small measure of comfort, some flicker of hope in the darkness. He would be there for her, always. He was her family now. 667. Mark knelt beside Lyra and Mira, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He watched Myra's shallow breaths, each one a struggle, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that there was nothing more he could do medically. The infection had taken hold, ravaging her already weakened body. No medicine, no doctor, could reverse the inevitable. The realization hit him hard, a crushing wave of helplessness. He had poured all his energy into trying to save Mira, clinging to the hope of a miracle. But miracles were rare in Sector 7, and sometimes, despite the best efforts, death came knocking. It was a harsh truth, one he had learned to accept over the years, but it didn't make it any easier to bear. Especially now, seeing the devastation in Lyra's eyes. He shifted his focus, realizing that his role had changed. He could no longer fight death, but he could help Lyra prepare for it, to make Myra's final days as comfortable and peaceful as possible. He gently stroked Lyra's head, his touch conveying his love and support. He started sharing stories, tales of his own childhood, memories of his family, funny anecdotes that made Lyra smile, even through her tears. He wanted to fill the chamber with warmth, with love, to create a sense of peace amidst the impending loss. He spoke of the stars, of distant planets, of the wonders of the universe, distracting Lyra from the pain and fear that threatened to consume her. He spent hours simply sitting with them, holding Lyra's hand, sharing quiet moments of companionship. He knew that these moments were precious, that they would be etched in Lyra's memory forever. He wanted to make sure they were filled with love and comfort, a testament to the bond they had formed in this unlikely place. He gently cleaned Myra's face, smoothing her brow, whispering words of encouragement. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he hoped his presence brought her some solace. He noticed that Lyra seemed confused by some of his actions, by the way he spoke about death and grieving. He realized that their cultures differed significantly in how they approached the end of life. Humans often mourned openly, expressing their grief through tears and lamentations. Lyra's species, on the other hand, seemed to favor a more stoic approach, focusing on preserving memories and honoring the deceased through quiet contemplation. He learned that Mira had been teaching Lyra about their ancestral traditions, preparing her for the eventuality of her own passing. Lyra had learned ancient songs and rituals, practices intended to ease the transition to the afterlife and to ensure that the spirit of the departed was honored. He realized that he could learn from Lyra, that he could gain a new perspective on death and grieving. He helped Lyra prepare for Myra's passing, gathering scavenged materials to create a small memorial, a place where she could honor her mother's memory. They found some colorful scraps of fabric, some smooth stones, and a few flickering candles to decorate the chamber. It was a simple gesture, but it was filled with love and intention. Lyra, with Mark's support, began to accept the inevitable. She knew that Mira was dying, and she knew that there was nothing she could do to stop it. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. She had Mark by her side, someone who cared for her, someone who would help her through this difficult time. She focused on making Mira comfortable, on cherishing their remaining moments together. She whispered stories of their home world, of the adventures they had shared, of the love that bound them together. She sang ancient songs, her voice soft and clear, filling the chamber with a sense of peace and tranquility. She held Myra's hand, her touch gentle and loving. She knew that her mother was listening, that she was receiving her love. She prepared herself for the loss, knowing that it would be the most difficult thing she had ever faced. But she also knew that she would survive, that she would carry Myra's memory with her always. She had Mark, and she had her own strength. She was ready as she could be. 667. The morning arrived with a chilling stillness. The chaotic symphony of Neo-Kyoto seemed muted, as if the city itself held its breath. Mark stirred in his sleep, a sense of dread settling over him. He glanced at Lyra, curled up beside him on the makeshift bed they had created in the collapsed building. Her face was peaceful, her feathery antennae still. He knew, without having to check, that Mira was gone. He rose slowly, carefully avoiding waking Lyra. He approached Mira, lying still beneath the tattered blanket. He reached out a hand, hesitantly touching her cheek. Her skin was cold, her breathing absent. Her luminous eyes, which had once sparkled with life, were now closed, veiled in a permanent slumber. Mira had passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by love and compassion. The suffering was over. Mark felt a wave of grief wash over him, a profound sense of loss. He hadn't known Mira for long, but he had grown fond of her, respecting her strength and her unwavering love for her daughter. He had tried his best to save her, but fate had other plans. He knelt beside her, offering a silent prayer for her soul. He hoped she had found peace, that she was now in a better place, free from pain and suffering. He gently woke Lyra, his voice soft and soothing. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him expectantly, her face hopeful. He knew he had to tell her the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He took her hand, holding it tightly. "Lyra," he said gently. "Mira, she's gone." Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked at her mother, her expression questioning. She reached out and touched Myra's face, her fingers tracing her delicate features. She shook her head slowly, refusing to accept what Mark had told her. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. No, she's just sleeping. Mark pulled her close, holding her tightly as she began to sob. He knew there were no words that could ease her pain, no platitudes that could lessen her grief. He simply held her, offering his silent support, letting her know that she wasn't alone. Lyra cried for a long time, her body racked with sobs. She cried for her mother, for her home world, for the life she had lost. She cried for the future that would never be. Mark felt his own tears welling up, his heart aching for Lyra's suffering. He had become a father figure to her, and her pain was his pain. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that Lyra would face many challenges in the coming days. But he also knew that she was strong, that she had the resilience to overcome any obstacle. He would be there for her, always guiding her, protecting her, loving her. As Lyra's sobs subsided, Mark looked at her, his eyes filled with compassion. He gently wiped away her tears, his touch tender and loving. Lyra, he said softly, I promise you, I will always be here for you. You're not alone. I'm your family now. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She nodded slowly, accepting his promise. They spent the rest of the day preparing Myra's body for burial. They wrapped her in the colorful scraps of fabric they had scavenged, adorning her with flowers and other small treasures. They sang ancient songs, honoring her spirit and remembering her life. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dilapidated building, they carried Myra's body to a small clearing outside, a place where they had often sat together, sharing stories and dreams. They dug a shallow grave, lining it with smooth stones and fragrant herbs. They placed Myra's body gently inside, covering her with dirt and flowers. Mark, with Lyra at his side, spoke a few words of remembrance, honoring Myra's memory and celebrating her life. They lit candles, their flickering flames casting a warm glow on the small memorial. They stood in silence for a long time, paying their respects to Myra. The grief was still raw, the pain still sharp, but there was also a sense of peace, a feeling that Myra was finally at rest. Mark looked at Lyra, her face etched with sorrow. He knew that the grieving process would take time, but he also knew that she would get through it. He would be there for her, every step of the way. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear, they would face it together. 667. Lyra struggled in the days that followed. The collapsed building felt emptier, colder, the silence amplifying the absence of Myra's gentle presence. She wandered through the familiar corridors, her footsteps echoing in the void, her heart aching with a grief so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. The weight of her loss was palpable, a heavy cloak that clung to her, suffocating her with sorrow. She missed her mother's stories, her comforting touch, the unwavering love that had always been her anchor in a chaotic universe. Mark watched her with concern, his own heart heavy with grief and a fierce protectiveness towards the young alien. He knew that time was the only true healer, but he couldn't bear to see Lyra consumed by her sorrow. He dedicated himself to easing her pain, offering her comfort, guidance, and a safe haven from the harsh realities of Sector 7. He took her under his wing, teaching her the survival skills he had honed over years of hardship. He showed her how to scavenge for resources, how to repair broken equipment, how to navigate the treacherous streets and avoid danger. He started by reinforcing their makeshift shelter, strengthening the walls and sealing the gaps to provide better protection from the elements. He taught her how to identify edible plants, how to purify water, how to create fire. He shared his knowledge of the city, the hidden pathways, the safe zones, the places to avoid. He taught her self-defense techniques, showing her how to use her agility and intelligence to her advantage. He knew that he couldn't replace Myra, but he could provide Lyra with the skills and knowledge she needed to survive and thrive in this unforgiving world. He wanted to empower her, to give her the confidence to face the future, to honor her mother's memory by living a full and meaningful life. He also provided her with a safe place to grieve, a space where she could express her emotions without judgment or pressure. He listened patiently to her stories of Myra, her memories of their home world, her dreams for the future. He encouraged her to keep Myra's memory alive, to honor her traditions, to never forget the lessons she had learned. He helped her create a small shrine in their shelter, a place where she could meditate, pray, and connect with her mother's spirit. He also faced criticism and prejudice from other humans in Sector 7 for taking in an alien. Some saw Lyra as a burden, a drain on already scarce resources. Others viewed her with suspicion and fear, wary of her unfamiliar appearance and customs. Mark ignored the negativity, determined to protect Lyra from the prejudice of others. He defended her fiercely, reminding others of the human-friendly universe ideals of acceptance and compassion. He pointed out that Lyra was just a child, a vulnerable orphan who needed their help. He challenged their prejudices, urging them to see Lyra as an individual, not as a stereotype. He also sought out other struggling individuals in their community, offering them assistance and support. He shared his food, his skills, and his knowledge, hoping to create a sense of solidarity and mutual aid. He helped repair broken homes, clean up polluted areas, and provide basic medical care to those in need. He showed Lyra the importance of giving back, of helping others, of making their community a better place. Lyra, inspired by Mark's example, began to adapt to her new life. She learned human customs and skills quickly, demonstrating a remarkable resilience and intelligence. She absorbed his knowledge like a sponge, mastering new languages, repairing complex machinery, and even learning some basic medical techniques. She started to find joy in helping others, finding purpose in their shared struggles. She befriended other children in the community, both human and alien, forming bonds of friendship and support. She started to laugh again, her smile a beacon of hope in the darkness. She began to build a new life for herself, one filled with love, purpose, and a deep connection to her community. She would never forget her mother, but she was learning to live again, to embrace the future with courage and hope. 667. Lyra began to thrive under Mark's care. The initial grief, though still present, started to recede, replaced by a burgeoning sense of purpose and a renewed zest for life. She was like a resilient seedling, pushing through the cracked concrete of Sector 7, reaching for the faint rays of sunlight that pierced through the decaying cityscape. She soaked up knowledge like a sponge, her agile mind readily absorbing new concepts and skills. Mark watched her progress with pride, his heart swelling with a paternal affection he never knew he was capable of. Her small, nimble fingers proved adept at scavenging and repair. She could dismantle broken machinery with surprising speed, identifying the faulty components and finding creative solutions to fix them. She learned to patch damaged clothing, mend torn fabrics, and create useful items from discarded materials. She even developed a knack for electronics, tracing circuits and soldering wires with an impressive level of precision. Mark marveled at her ingenuity, her ability to transform trash into treasure. Lyra also displayed a remarkable aptitude for basic medicine. She studied Mark's first aid kit with intense curiosity, memorizing the uses of each bandage, antiseptic, and pain reliever. She learned to recognize the symptoms of common ailments, how to treat wounds and burns, and how to administer basic medications. She even started experimenting with herbal remedies, using her knowledge of plant life to create soothing balms and teas. Mark was impressed by her dedication, her desire to heal and help others. He knew that she was driven by a deep-seated empathy, a desire to alleviate suffering in a world filled with pain. He encouraged her to pursue her medical interests, sharing his limited knowledge and providing her with opportunities to practice her skills. He knew that she had the potential to become a valuable asset to their community, a healer and caregiver in a place where medical resources were scarce. Mark was incredibly proud of Lyra's progress, her ability to overcome adversity and embrace her new life. She had transformed from a vulnerable, grieving orphan into a confident, capable young woman. She had found her purpose, her passion, and her place in the world. She had become a symbol of hope and resilience in Sector 7, a testament to the power of the human spirit, or in this case, the alien spirit, to triumph over hardship. Mark and Lyra, despite their differences, embodied the ideals of the human-friendly universe. They demonstrated the power of empathy, compassion, and mutual aid, even in the face of scarcity and prejudice. They had created a small haven of kindness and understanding in a world that often seemed devoid of both. They had shown that even in the darkest of times, hope could still flourish, that even the most unlikely individuals could forge a bond of love and support. They worked together to improve their community, helping those in need, sharing their resources, and advocating for the marginalized. They organized food drives, collected clothing for the homeless, and provided medical care to the sick and injured. They challenged the prejudices of others, promoting acceptance and understanding between different species and cultures. They had become a beacon of light in Sector 7, inspiring others to follow their example. They had found a shared purpose in helping others, in making their community a better place. They had learned that true happiness wasn't found in material possessions or personal gain, but in the act of giving back, of making a positive difference in the world. They had discovered the power of human connection, the strength that comes from standing together in solidarity. Mark looked at Lyra, her face beaming with joy as she helped a young child bandage a scraped knee, and he felt a surge of pride and contentment. He had saved her life, but she had also saved his. She had given him a new purpose, a new reason to live. He was no longer just a solitary scavenger, struggling to survive in a decaying city. He was a father, a mentor, a friend. He was part of a family, part of a community. He was making a difference. He knew that the challenges ahead would be great, that the future was uncertain. But he also knew that they would face those challenges together, with courage, compassion, and unwavering determination. They were a team, a force for good in a world that desperately needed it. They were a testament to the ideals of the human-friendly universe, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could still prevail. 667. The relative peace and quiet Mark and Lyra had cultivated in their corner of Sector 7 was about to be shattered. An external threat was looming, a darkness that threatened to engulf their fragile community and plunge them back into chaos. A notorious gang, known as the Crimson Hand, had begun to extend its influence into their sector, preying on the vulnerable populations and exploiting their desperation. The Crimson Hand was a ruthless organization, notorious for its brutality and its insatiable greed. They controlled the black markets, extorted protection money, and trafficked in stolen goods and illicit substances. They had a reputation for violence, and their enforcers were known to use intimidation and brutality to maintain their control. They saw Sector 7 as an untapped resource, a pool of desperate souls ripe for exploitation. The gang's presence was initially subtle, a few new faces lurking in the shadows, whispers of increased protection fees. But it soon escalated, with open displays of force, violent confrontations, and the disappearance of several community members. Mark and Lyra watched with growing concern as the Crimson Hand tightened its grip on their sector, their sense of security eroding with each passing day. Lyra, remembering the hardships she had faced, the desperation of her mother's illness, and the kindness Mark had shown her, felt a surge of protectiveness towards her new family and community. She couldn't stand by and watch as the Crimson Hand destroyed everything they had worked so hard to build. She resolved to fight back, to defend her community from these predators. "We can't let them do this, Mark," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We have to protect our people." Mark, however, was more hesitant. He had seen too much violence in his life, too much suffering. He knew the risks involved in confronting the Crimson Hand, the potential for bloodshed and devastation. He didn't want to put Lyra in danger, or any of the other members of their community. "I know you want to help, Lyra," he said, his voice weary. "But this is dangerous. The Crimson Hand is not someone you can just reason with. They're ruthless. We could get hurt or worse." But Lyra was adamant. She refused to back down. She had seen what happened when good people did nothing, when they allowed evil to triumph. She wouldn't make that mistake again. "We can't just stand by and watch them destroy us, Mark," she said. "We have to fight for what's right." Mark was torn. He understood Lyra's passion, her desire to protect her community. But he also feared for her safety, for the safety of everyone he cared about. He knew that confronting the Crimson Hand was a risky proposition, but he also knew that doing nothing was not an option. He couldn't let these predators exploit and abuse their people. He had to do something, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. He spent the next few days weighing his options, trying to find a way to protect his community without resorting to violence. He considered appealing to the authorities, but he knew that the HFY peacekeepers were often slow to respond to problems in the lower sectors. He thought about negotiating with the Crimson Hand, but he doubted that they would be willing to listen to reason. Finally, he realized that there was only one way to protect his community: to stand up to the Crimson Hand, to show them that they wouldn't be intimidated. He knew it would be a difficult and dangerous task, but he couldn't turn his back on the people he cared about. He had to fight for them, even if it meant risking everything. He approached Lyra, his face set with determination. "All right, Lyra," he said. "We'll fight them. But we'll do it smart. We'll need to gather allies, plan our strategy, and be prepared for anything." Lyra's face lit up with excitement. "I knew you'd come around, Mark," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Together, we can do this." They began to rally other individuals in their community, people who were tired of being exploited and abused. They spoke to their neighbors, their friends, and their fellow scavengers, sharing their concerns and their plans. They found that many people were eager to join their cause, willing to risk their lives to protect their community. Slowly but surely, they began to build a resistance, a coalition of ordinary people who were determined to stand up to the Crimson Hand. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, that they were facing a powerful and ruthless enemy. But they were united by their shared sense of purpose, their belief in justice, and their determination to protect their community. They were ready to fight. 667. The confrontation was inevitable. The lines had been drawn, the alliances forged. Mark and Lyra, standing at the heart of their ragtag resistance, prepared to face the Crimson Hand. Their numbers were small, their resources meager, but their spirit burned bright with defiance. They had transformed the collapsed building into a makeshift fortress, reinforcing the walls with scavenged metal and setting up booby traps to deter intruders. Lyra, surprisingly, had become a natural leader. Her past experiences, her resilience in the face of hardship, and her unwavering commitment to her community had inspired others to follow her. She possessed a sharp tactical mind, able to analyze situations quickly and devise innovative solutions. She organized patrols, trained recruits in self-defense, and coordinated their defenses with remarkable efficiency. Mark, initially hesitant, found himself relying on Lyra's judgment, trusting her instincts, and supporting her decisions. He provided his own expertise in scavenging, repair, and combat, sharing his knowledge and experience with the other members of the resistance. The Crimson Hand, arrogant and overconfident, launched their first attack under the cover of darkness. They expected an easy victory, a swift takeover of Sector 7. But they were met with fierce resistance. Lyra had anticipated their movements, positioning her forces strategically to ambush the attackers. The booby traps, cleverly disguised among the rubble, inflicted heavy casualties, slowing their advance. Lyra, armed with a scavenged energy pistol, moved swiftly through the corridors, directing her forces and engaging the enemy in close-quarters combat. She was a whirlwind of motion, her small size and agility making her a difficult target to hit. She fought with a ferocity that surprised even Mark, driven by a burning desire to protect her community. Mark, wielding his trusty rusted pipe, fought alongside Lyra, his years of scavenging experience giving him an edge in the chaotic melee. He protected her from harm, shielding her from enemy fire and clearing the way for her to advance. The battle raged through the night, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and desperate cries. The resistance fighters, though outnumbered, fought with courage and determination, defending their homes and their families. They used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, ambushing the attackers, setting up traps, and utilizing guerrilla tactics to wear them down. Unexpectedly, reinforcements arrived. Word of the resistance had spread throughout Sector 7, inspiring other individuals to join the fight. A group of human scavengers, led by a grizzled veteran named Jake, arrived with a truckload of weapons and ammunition. A band of alien refugees, from a species known for their strength and ferocity, charged into battle, their roars echoing through the night. Inspired by Mark and Lyra's example, they had decided to take a stand against the Crimson Hand, to fight for their freedom and their dignity. The arrival of these unexpected allies turned the tide of the battle. The Crimson Hand, caught off guard, began to falter. Their advance stalled, and their morale began to crumble. Lyra seized the opportunity, leading a counterattack that pushed the enemy back. She rallied her forces, urging them to fight harder, to push the invaders out of their sector. The resistance fighters, fueled by adrenaline and desperation, surged forward, driving the Crimson Hand back towards the edge of Sector 7. Lyra, a symbol of hope for the marginalized, was at the forefront of the attack, her courage and determination inspiring her allies. She was no longer just a grieving orphan, struggling to survive in a hostile world. She was a leader, a protector, a force to be reckoned with. The people of Sector 7 had found their champion, and they were ready to fight for her. The Crimson Hand, their dreams of conquest shattered, retreated in disarray, leaving behind their dead and wounded. The resistance had won, but the war was far from over. They had proven that they wouldn't be intimidated, that they would fight for what was right. The marginalized communities of Sector 7, inspired by the triumph, had hope for the future. Lyra, a beacon of hope, had just started. 667. The dust settled, revealing a scene of hard-won victory. The Crimson Hand, routed and humiliated, had retreated, leaving Sector 7 to lick its wounds and count its dead. But amidst the wreckage, a sense of elation pulsed through the community. They had defended their homes, their families, their dignity. They had stared into the face of oppression and refused to blink. Lyra, standing amidst the weary but triumphant fighters, felt a surge of pride and relief. The battle had been brutal, the losses heavy, but they had prevailed. She had proven to herself, and to others, that even the most vulnerable could find strength in unity, that even the smallest spark of hope could ignite a revolution. She looked at Mark, his face smudged with dirt and grime, his eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and admiration. He had been her rock, her mentor, her protector. He had taught her everything she knew about survival, about compassion, about the importance of standing up for what was right. The immediate threat of the Crimson Hand had been neutralized, but the underlying problems remained. Sector 7 was still a forgotten corner of Neo-Kyoto, its inhabitants struggling to survive in the shadows of a decaying city. The systems that allowed the Crimson Hand to prey on the vulnerable were still in place. Mark and Lyra knew that their fight was far from over. They needed to address the root causes of the exploitation, to create a more just and equitable society for all. Lyra dedicated her life to helping others. She established a community center in the collapsed building, transforming it into a place of learning, healing, and empowerment. She taught survival skills, offering workshops on scavenging, repair, and self-defense. She provided medical care to the sick and injured, using her knowledge of herbal remedies and basic first aid to alleviate suffering. She organized educational programs for children, ensuring that they had access to the knowledge and skills they needed to succeed. She became an advocate for the marginalized, speaking out against injustice and inequality. She rallied support for political reforms that would benefit the lower sectors, demanding better access to resources, improved infrastructure, and greater representation in government. She worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between different species and cultures, promoting understanding and cooperation between humans and aliens. Lyra carried on her mother's legacy, honoring her memory by helping those in need. She never forgot the hardships she had faced, the desperation of her mother's illness, and the kindness Mark had shown her. She channeled her grief and her anger into positive action, determined to create a world where no one would have to suffer as she had. Mark watched Lyra with immense pride, marveling at her transformation. She had become a true leader, a force for good in a world that desperately needed it. He continued to support her efforts, providing her with guidance, resources, and unwavering love. He knew that she would face many challenges in the years to come, but he had faith in her ability to overcome them. He reflected on the importance of empathy, compassion, and the power of human connection. He had started as a solitary scavenger, struggling to survive in a decaying city. But he had found his purpose in helping others, in building a community, in making a difference in the world. He had learned that true happiness wasn't found in material possessions or personal gain, but in the act of giving back, of sharing his love and compassion with those in need. Even in a challenging future, kindness and understanding can make a difference. The human-friendly universe wasn't perfect, but it was a work in progress, a constant effort to create a more just and equitable society for all. He believed that Lyra, with her unwavering dedication and her unwavering commitment to justice, would play a key role in shaping that future. He wanted to create a better world. If you enjoyed this story of the HFY universe, subscribe to our channel for more tales of hope, resilience, and the power of human connection. And suggest future topics and scenarios you'd like to see explored in this universe. Thank you for watching. 667